Good morning coffee. Hey guys, Julian from synthwavepro.com here. Welcome to the channel. In this synthwave tutorial, let's explore layering kick drums. Why? Well, because sometimes one kick drum just isn't enough. So let's play our song, get some context, and we can dive in deeper. All right, easy stuff here. The most important thing when it comes to layering the kick drums here is to pay particular attention to the waveforms. All right, so let me loop this section. This is what we have. We have our low kick, our mid punch kick. And as for this top kick, although it's labeled top kick, it's really just a hi-hat hit. And together it sounds like this. The takeaway message of this tutorial is to line up your kick drums by using the visual cues of the waveform. So this is my low kick here, and you can see that we have some rises followed by a valley, followed by another rise, valley, or peak, valley, etc. You want to make sure that your low kick and your mid punch kick are lined up. So if I pay attention to my low kick, the rise here, or slight rise, will line up with my mid punch rise here, and then the valley of my low kick will also line up with the valley of my mid kick, and so on and so forth. Now, this isn't always possible, so you may have to slightly shift a sample left or right to make sure that they line up properly. But for the most part, for a few cycles here, you can see that they are lined up. Eventually, they no longer line up when we get to this portion, but that's absolutely fine because you'll notice that by the time we get to this area, the mid punch kick is playing on its own, so it doesn't have to be in line with our sub kick. Now, I know that there are a number of plugins by Waves and a few other manufacturers that allow you to check whether or not your samples are in phase, in particular your kick drums. But if you don't have access to those plugins, you can use these visual cues. All right, it's an easy method to figure out, if your samples are in phase. You can also use this control here, which micro shifts your samples ever so slightly. Now, the unit of measurement is in milliseconds here, and so I've had to slowly manipulate this control. You can hear that they're flamming now, and that's not what we want. So I'm just nudging this parameter here to ensure that the samples are lining up together, and then I can go in and ensure that the waveforms follow one another. Now let's look at the EQing of our low kick here. You'll notice that for our low kick, our EQ is pretty much cutting out or shelving a lot of those higher frequency content, and we're scooping out some of those lower mids at, say, about 223 Hertz. I'm removing as much as 20 dBs here. I don't want that mud in my signal. And I'm also shelving off a lot of those higher frequencies just to make sure that my top kick here, which is essentially a hi-hat, can fill up this space. All right, so let's move on to our mid kick here. This is what the EQing looks like, essentially a bandpass. So I'm really concerned with keeping the frequencies in between 269 Hertz and 8K. This is what this sounds like. All right, so I've had to implement this bandpass because I've added a camel crusher here, which is a sort of saturator, a distortion tool, and it provided a lot of higher frequency content that I did not want. As a result, I had to get rid of these higher frequency content because, as I've mentioned, the top kick is what's going to provide that higher frequency content. All right, so as for my top kick or hi-hat hit, this is what the EQing looks like, and this is what it sounds like. So I've kept everything north of 2300 Hertz, and I cut out everything below that point as I don't want to introduce any sub or mid-range frequencies into this signal. I've also added the erosion and the overdrive tool here, stock plugins by Ableton. So I'll just toggle them on and off and we can see what they're providing to this sound. With it off, no sustain, on, a little more grit, and a lot more sustain. Okay, now let's solo these three samples to see what each and every single one of these sounds happens to be contributing to our overall sound. I'm muting the hi-hat channel here. You can see that we're missing that tick, tick, tick at the top. no click, with click. All right, let's mute our mid punch kick. Sounds much rounder. And with it, we get that mid-range frequency punch. Okay, and last but not least, our sub kick. More bottom end. Now, one more thing to take note of is that when you're using audio samples, you can clearly see these visual aids here, these waveforms going up and down, and it makes it a lot easier to line up our mid and our sub kick here as we've done. Really difficult to do this when you're working exclusively with MIDI tracks. In other words, when you import your audio sample, you drop it into a simpler or a sampler, you don't get this sort of level of control. So another cool aspect to working with audio samples is that we can adjust the fade out points of our sample. For instance, my low kick here, well, I've shortened the fade out time so that it's really short. I didn't want it to be this long. I just came in here and adjusted the length of the overall sample. I just wanted a lower kick drum sample to be in and out. I didn't want it trailing on for too long. As for our mid kick, I let it trail on for a little longer. And as for our hi-hat hit here, I've adjusted the volume fade out control so that my sample is shortened. So this provides another aspect of control if you're concerned that certain samples are trailing on for far too long. It's easy to see this visually when you're working with audio samples as opposed to slapping your kick drums in a sampler or simpler and working from there, okay? Neither one or the other is better, but sometimes it's cool to have these visual cues, so I'll opt for sliding in my samples in audio format. All right, so audio samples provide you with that extra level of control that may not be obvious when you're working with MIDI data, okay? Something to take note of when you're working on your production. All right, so let's play our song one last time here. I'm going to toggle on and off different parts of the kick drum complex here, the hi-hat, the mid punch, and the low kick, and we can see what they contribute to the overall sound. No click. No mid punch kick. Cool component to having a kick complex is the ability to toggle on and off different parts of your kick. So when your song is a little busier, you may want to have that click, that hi-hat section here, that top end of your kick complex to be heard. And then when you have a passage that's a little quieter, you don't have too many instruments, you can just come in here and disable it. Okay, so your kick drum would sound like this. And then when it gets a little busier in your song, you can introduce that click. All right, these subtle changes, these are the things that make our song a lot more interesting. So if you'd like to deep dive into more synthwave music production, then head on over to synthwavepro.com. I offer some really in-depth synthwave tutorials and masterclasses. That's where we cover songs from start to finish. We build our song from start to finish. We cover everything from workflow to sound design, arrangement, mixing, and mastering. All right, so with that said, I do have a bunch of merch. Some of you have commented or sent me emails about my t-shirt and said, you know, I want to get my hands on one of your t-shirts. So I do offer t-shirts now. Hey, and I also have a cool coffee mug here with this Synthwave Pro logo here. So if you're interested in supporting me that way, by all means, check out the links in the description, check out my shop. I really appreciate the support you guys have been sending me, whether it's subscribing to the channel or just saying, hey man, I like what you're doing. Really appreciate that. With that said, guys, if you found this useful, consider subscribing to the channel, hit that bell notification button so you know exactly when my tutorials drop. And if you found this remotely valuable, consider giving me a like. All right, guys, that's it for me, guys. I hope to see you next time. And with that said, stay safe. Bye-bye now.